Hi everybody, this is Joe with Foozle CC, and today I'm going to show you how you can pretty quickly integrate Construct 3, the browser-based video game engine for making 2D games quickly, with PlayFab, which is a very nice back-end solution that you can do a ton of stuff with. I'm going to show you the absolute very beginning steps of that journey. I'm going to show you how you can create a quick title inside of PlayFab and how you can get your Construct 3 editor to be working with the PlayFab SDK, and how to authenticate a user with your PlayFab backend. Once you do that, that's really the first step to then leveraging all the capabilities of PlayFab, including virtual currency, storing inventory. Maybe you just have game data that you want to save each time. It's very useful for a whole range of games, and kind of a necessary thing if you're going to do anything cross-platform, or if you just need something that's able to be, stored in something more reliably than the browser memory. Okay, with that said, let's go ahead and jump into our editor. Okay, so the goal of this tutorial is we're going to get to the point where we are getting a session ticket from PlayFab, which means that we have authenticated a user with our PlayFab title. Now, I'm going to show you two ways to do this. The first way is free, but a little bit more hard work and might become difficult to maintain. And the second way uses an established plugin that does cost money, but I think that you'll find that it's probably worth it. But let's start with the first way. So you can see here inside the editor, I've already got a few things set up. I've got a basic login where you can type in a username and a password into these text inputs. And I've got a few buttons here that I'm going to use to show you how it can work from a test perspective. I'm going to show you how to do it with what's called a custom ID, which is the lowest level of security. You type in whatever you want as your text input, and as long as it's not taken, you're good to go and there's no password. And the next is I'm going to show you how to do it with a email and password. So this is the editor, and we have to work between not only the editor but also PlayFab when we're setting this up. So let's go over to PlayFab's website and figure out where you can first grab the SDK for JavaScript, which is the first step. So I'll put this link down below, but you want to download this PlayFab SDK. And when you download it and open it up, you're going to find, after you drill in and unzip it, and you go to this part of the directory, a whole bunch of different APIs. For today's tutorial, you really just need the PlayFab client API. Once you have that, you can come to your editor. Under your scripts, you can right-click, add or import script, and you can see here I've already done that, PlayFab client API. And that's the first step really of getting the SDK into your editor. Now, you also have to make sure that you've created an account with PlayFab. So when you go over to PlayFab and you register, you'll probably be shown a few tutorial options, etc. But largely you need to get to this screen, which is My Studios and Titles. Now I've already created a demo title here for us to leverage, but you can come here, hit New Title, and type in any name really, and that's all the information they really require. Once you do that, you get a really important piece of information, which is your ID, also known as your title ID. When you have that, you're gonna have to put that in a couple places. So let's talk about inside of the editor what we've done to establish a communication with PlayFab to get a session ticket and allow a user to authenticate. So the first thing is, in addition to the PlayFab client API, which we've imported, there's two things that we're going to create. The first is a PlayFab event sheet, and the second is a PlayFab JavaScript file. Let's start with the PlayFab event sheet. So the PlayFab event sheet, the very first thing you should do is you create a global string and put your global, or put your title ID into something like pf title _ ID. Now, I will put this up on my itch page, so if you don't want to follow along too closely and you just want to download it and look at it at your own time, feel free to go and do that as well. Link down below. I will also include the link to the artwork for this user interface if you just want to use the exact same thing. That's all good. Okay, so continuing on. Let's skip over these for a moment. But what we need to do is we need to essentially have a set of functions that will call a function on our JavaScript. And our JavaScript function is going to be the one that actually leverages the SDK that we just imported. So the first thing we're going to do is log in with custom ID. Okay, so we have the custom ID function here, and I'm asking that we pass two parameters forward. One is the PF title ID and one is the custom ID. And when we call these functions from clicking on that button, we'll pass both this global variable that we just set as well as what the user typed in into this function. And well, you can see here in this function, we're only doing one thing. We have a little script here that is calling the function that we wrote inside of our JavaScript file. So let's go over to there. Now, there's a few things that you should be aware of when you start this. First and foremost, if you haven't used JavaScript before inside of Construct 3, I do recommend you come over to the website here, go to the manual, go to the documentation, and go down to scripting. And just read through that. It will give you a lot of basic understandings of how to pass data back and forth and how to use JavaScript inside of Construct 3. Back to the editor. Okay, and the first thing that you're really going to want to know how to do here is on the run on startup, this is something that we're going to want to do at the very top of our script. And effectively what this snippet is doing is making our runtime, which contains all these things like our functions on our event sheet, etc., available globally so that our script can access it here. So global this dot g underscore runtime equals runtime. I now can use g underscore runtime to access the other functions on my event sheet inside of this script. So that's an important step. Now, what we're calling is this pf underscore login with custom ID. I'm passing in the title ID and the custom ID. And this is something that you have to do when you approach, when you use the SDK, is you have to go ahead and you have to set playfab.settings.title ID is equal to your pf title ID. And that lets it know what your title ID is. Now we're going to build what is called our request body. And if you go over to the documentation, you can see under the request body what sort of items that you can set. In this tutorial, we are using the title ID, the custom ID, and create account equals to true because I want to go ahead and create account if the one does not exist already. And once I do that, I can go ahead and I can use the SDK, which is what we imported, to issue the login with custom ID. And we pass in the login request, which we built here. And we define what function we want to run on the response. So I've named that on login with custom ID. For a function on login with custom ID, we have a response and an error. Basically what we do is if we have a response, let's go ahead and log it. And also there's data in that response. And one of those things is the session ticket. So let's go ahead and grab that by going session ticket equals response.data.session ticket. Let's log it in the console. And then also I want to use that g underscore runtime for me to call the function on login with custom ID. And I want to pass the session ticket. And what that allows me to do is here, I can now grab that text box that I was showing you earlier and set the text to session ticket. And I'm going to go ahead once that's successful and make my UI login invisible. All right, let's see if that worked. Okay, so let's go ahead and make this Foozle CC. I'm going to use this button here because this is what's going to trigger it. I didn't show you that snippet. But if we do this, we were successful. All right, look, we got our session ticket here from PlayFab. If we hit F12, we can see it logged, it worked. And this is what the session ticket was. So good job. We made it work. That was our first baby step in using PlayFab. Real quick to show you, I guess the button code, which is really simple, is I have this on tap gesture of custom ID login button, call login with custom ID. And we're passing in that PF title ID parameter and the username input.text. And if you remember, the login with custom ID is right here. And then that is calling the script function where we built our request body and then used the SDK. So that was the string of events that we had to do in order to log in and get a session ticket using custom ID. We can build upon that basic logic to utilize a slightly more complex login scheme, which is email and password. Similarly, inside of the authentication, you can see that there is additional documentation on how to do that. For the email, this is your request body. You need obviously your email and your password and the title ID. That all makes sense, right? So if we were to use an email, what we first need to do is we need to make sure that they're registered. So this is kind of a two-step process now. Now is you need to register, and then you need to log in. And you can make it so that the login is automatic once the register has occurred. But once they are registered, they only have to use the login moving forward. So you have to utilize the register SDK, and you have to utilize the login with email SDK. Now for register, we're going to do the same type of thing, except for I did add a little bit of extra code here. Feel free to use it. And what it is it's checking that the email address is valid. And if it's not, give them an error. So I won't spend time on that. If it is valid, what you can then do is you can build that request body. And for our request body for this, it's the SDK, register PlayFab user, and you need the title ID. They require both username and email. I have as false, and email is the register email that I'm passing in. And password is the register password, which I'm passing in, which ultimately comes from the user input text boxes on the UI screen. And then I want to call this onRegister PlayFab user response once it's successful, or whenever I receive the response. When I do that, I have both my response and error again, and I can check, all right, I have a response, fantastic. There's a lot of data in here in terms of entity ID, entity type, and other things. I don't know necessarily how much you really need to store. You do need to leverage some of these pieces of information, though, in other types of calls to PlayFab, so it's useful to store the results once you get it back. And then you can go ahead and call the function login with email results and pass all this back, because I'm going to store it in a global variable. So, and then I also have, if you get an error, go ahead and give me the error report and alert the user. If you come back here, you can see the login with email results. All I'm really doing is I'm going ahead and setting the PlayFab session ticket, as well as all those other things that we talked about, and I'm going to make the UI login invisible. So let's see if that works. All right, let's do this test 9876 at, you know, let's just try this. Let's see if our error reporting works. Let's go ahead and register. Invalid email address. All right, let's try this again. Test 9876 at gmail.com, and I made a requirement that you have at least 6 characters, and let's go ahead and register. Oh, interesting. Okay, so that worked. So we have our session ticket. Now, you might wonder, well, I registered, how did it log in? We kind of glanced over that. If you look at the code inside of my script, I actually, on register response, if it's successful, I go ahead and I call my login with email address, so it automatically logs in the user. So you can go ahead and, you know, pass in the title ID, the email, and the password, and you're able to successfully log in after registering. So now that we've registered, let's see, can I see those users inside of my backend? So if I go back to PlayFab and I click into my environment here, it'll show me some things. Okay, there's been some API calls, which we've been making, and I can go over here to players, and I can see, you know, most recent logins. I can see my my people here. So I've created a couple of dummy ones or whatever, and you can come in here and manage their information. So if you look in here, you can see all sorts of fun things. You can look at, you know, if they have any purchases, if there's any virtual currency, and there's a whole bunch of stuff inside of PlayFab that we're not going to cover in this tutorial, but you can manage all those things for the player here. Now, if we come back, now that we have registered, this next time I should be able to log in using the same username. I can't remember if that was the username. Nope, it was not. Maybe I had one too many. 987. Nope. Now I can't remember exactly what the username was. Let's just try registering again. Test987@gmail.com. So that worked. Let's go ahead and try that again. Test987@gmail.com. Password field is required. Apparently I'm not getting the password all the way over. I should have tested that before starting the demo. Login. Login password. I do event sheet. Login. Am I passing login with email? I'm passing in the password input.text. Login email, login password. That looks correct. Come over here. Log in with email. Okay. Parameter. That's why I register email and these were incorrect. So that's my mistake. Login email and login password. Let's see if that works. You know, and this is kind of tough, and this is why there's a lot of debugging involved, and why you might like this next solution. It might be a good segue. See if that works. Yep, it did. Okay. Apparently there's data breaches on some of my passwords. I should look into that. All right. So we made that work, and you could start to extrapolate how I could build out an entire thing related to authentication and all the other fun stuff that PlayFab can do. And that's fantastic, but that takes a ton of time and effort. So, with that said, I do heavily recommend you give this next option a consideration. And that is to use a plugin that has been built by a fantastic developer to accomplish this, along with a lot of other things. And that is the Construct Master Collection. And really specifically the PlayFab piece of that. But the Master Collection is pretty phenomenal because it comes with a lot of stuff. Now the price tag here is $199. That's not inexpensive. I heavily recommend if you go to the website that has great documentation and you come all the way down here, you can actually, let's go to pricing. You can actually, on Discord, get the pricing for much less. So I recommend going that route and getting it for $139.99 by just going through Discord. So definitely do that. And I do recommend just getting the whole thing because there's a lot of good stuff in here. And specifically, what we talked about today is just one of them, which is authentication. And you're going to want all this other stuff if you're going to be using PlayFab. So I heavily recommend considering it because there's a lot of time involved to go and build your own, and this already exists. And there's been a lot of improvements built on this over time. So inside the documentation, they do provide test construct 3 files for every single one of these. And here's an example of what we just went through today. And you can see that this is actually going to be a lot more convenient for you to work in, especially if you're used to Construct 3 and you don't want to spend the time working inside of the JavaScript and building off the SDK and doing all of that troubleshooting. I mean, this is just a phenomenal plugin that has all that stuff already figured out for you, and you're just using the event sheet as you normally would. So now inside the event sheet, I mean, you can come in and utilize the authentication plugin and the PlayFab API plugin, which is the first step for all of these. Basically, all you need to do with this is put it in here and put in your title ID. And then authentication is what you're going to use to do all your login and error handling. I mean, it's fully integrated with that SDK. So everything that we saw over here, you now kind of have access to, for the most part, inside of your editor. Sorry, wrong project. So we can do things like go ahead and log in when I hit this button, and you can say, hey, register on clicked. Okay. I'm going to do all these things, and then I'm going to use the authentication plugin to go ahead and call or register with company authentication using these things. And we didn't have to do any of that JavaScript stuff, which just makes it really convenient and saves a ton of time. Now, it is expensive, but it does save a lot of time, and it's well done. So if you are going to be building games that need to use a back end and you're using Construct 3, I do recommend PlayFab and using the master collection. It's just a great solution. So if we go ahead and we hit play, and it's really nice that they provide these test C3 Construct 3 files for every single one of the plugin options or objects. So if we go in here, we can go ahead and test whatever at gmail.com, username Foozle CC loves PlayFab. It's kind of long. Hopefully that works. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And let's go ahead and register. And guess what? It worked. So you know what? We're good to go. All right, everybody. And that wraps up our intro to PlayFab inside of Construct 3. You know, the first route that we showed, while free, is pretty painful and a lot of work and probably will involve a lot of debugging. So, you know, have at it. I will post what I've shown here today on my itch page, so feel free to go and download it and try to build on it. The second route I do heavily recommend if you can afford it. The Construct Master Collection is a fantastic set of plugins for Construct 3, and it really builds out a lot of the things that you might find that are missing inside of Construct 3 as you get closer to publishing your games, especially if you want to have that back end, if you want to have certain you know, additional add-ons for, you know, how to do things on mobile. So give it some thought, and you know, support the plugin creator if you're able to. If you did enjoy this content, please consider subscribing down below. It always makes my day whenever I see one come in. And on my itch page, you know, there is some good stuff there that I'm trying to build up for you guys to go and download, including some free art. Feel free to take a look, including the UI that I used in this demo. You can download there the assets so that you can use it in your own games. And with that said, everybody have a nice day.